He told the entire executive team that I'd be stepping back from client-facing work going forward. For professionalism, right after my divorce was finalized, in a meeting I wasn't even invited to attend. Let that sink in for a second. Because I sat with it a lot longer than a second, I'll tell you that much. My name's Diane Kowalski. I'm 47 years old. I've lived outside Cleveland, Ohio my whole life. And up until about 5 months ago, I would have told you the hardest thing I ever survived was already behind me. I would have been wrong. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one's going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Let me back up. Because you need to understand who I was before you understand what my own brother tried to quietly write me out of. Our father, Stanley Kowalski, started Kowalski Precision Tooling in 1974, a machine shop in a rented bay outside Cleveland making custom components for the automotive supply chain, the kind of unglamorous, exacting work that either earns a company decades of trust or gets it replaced by the next shop willing to cut corners. Dad never cut a corner in his life. I grew up in that shop, literally, sweeping floors at 8 years old, learning to read blueprints at 12, and by the time I finished my accounting degree at 22, there was never really a question of whether I'd come back to run the books. I did, and I stayed for 25 years, eventually becoming chief financial officer while my younger brother, Marcus, ran operations and after Dad passed 9 years ago, became CEO. I want to be fair to Marcus, so let me say this as generously as I can. He is a genuinely gifted operator. He understands the floor, the machines, the client relationships in a hands-on way I never quite matched. What Marcus has never fully understood, not for a single day of the last 9 years, is exactly how close this company came to not existing at all, and exactly whose money kept it standing when his own decisions nearly brought it down. In 2017, 3 years after Dad passed, Marcus made an aggressive expansion push, a second facility, new equipment financed heavily, a bet on a major new automotive contract that fell through at the worst possible moment when the client shifted production overseas without warning. Within 18 months, Kowalski Precision Tooling was carrying debt it could not service, 90 days from a bank calling the loan and forcing liquidation, 112 employees, many of whom had worked for our father personally, about to lose everything because of a bet Marcus made without fully consulting me on the underlying risk. I remember sitting across from our banker at the time, a careful, apologetic man named Harold Nesbitt, listening to him lay out the timeline in the same measured voice doctors use to deliver bad news, and understanding, with total clarity, that I had roughly 12 weeks to find a solution or watch my father's entire life's work get sold off in pieces to cover a debt none of us had seen coming clearly enough, soon enough. I didn't hesitate. I quietly liquidated a substantial portion of my own personal investment portfolio, money I'd built carefully over 2 decades of conservative investing on top of my CFO salary, and through a private holding entity managed by an attorney named Rosalind Marsh, I anonymously purchased the controlling majority of shares from the increasingly nervous minority shareholders who wanted out before the company collapsed entirely, effectively becoming the majority owner of the company our father built, without Marcus or almost anyone else ever knowing it was me. I did that on purpose. Marcus was already fragile with guilt over the near collapse, and I didn't want him to carry the added weight of knowing his sister had to quietly rescue the company he'd nearly sunk. I remember watching him those first few months afterward, hollowed out, barely sleeping, blaming himself in a way that genuinely worried me, and I made a decision right then that whatever it cost me personally, he was never going to carry the additional weight of knowing exactly how close he'd come to losing everything, or exactly whose money had quietly caught him. I wanted him to rebuild it believing he'd earned that rebuild through his own hard work and better decisions going forward, which, to his credit, he largely did over the following years. Rosalind structured everything through a shell entity with a name that meant nothing to anyone, and I continued showing up every single day as CFO Diane, the woman who did the numbers, never the woman who actually controlled the company's fate. My marriage to my husband Craig ended 14 months ago, after 18 years, quietly, no dramatic betrayal, just 2 people who'd slowly grown into different lives, and we separated with about as much grace as 2 exhausted, sad people can manage. The divorce finalized 4 months ago. I have never once let that ending define me at work because it never should have, and because I have never once needed anyone to know what I actually control at that company to know that I control it. Our controller, Janet Yee, has worked in that finance office for 18 years now, longer than almost anyone besides me, and Janet still remembers the exact week in 2017 when I came in early 3 days running, closed my office door, and didn't come out until well past dark, though at the time she assumed it was ordinary quarter-end stress rather than a woman quietly liquidating 2 decades of careful investing to save her father's company. Janet's one of maybe 3 people alive who noticed something was different that year without ever fully understanding what, and she's never once pried, which is exactly the kind of discretion that's made her indispensable to me over the years, the same quality Rosalind brings to everything she manages on my behalf. Now let me tell you about my brother, and what he decided my divorce meant for my professional future. Marcus Kowalski is 43 years old, and in the year since Dad passed, he has grown into a genuinely capable CEO, confident, well-regarded in the industry, the kind of leader clients trust on sight. I have been proud of him more times than I can count. What I was not prepared for was the specific brand of quiet condescension that crept into how he started treating me the moment my personal life became something he apparently felt entitled to manage on the company's behalf. It started small. The way it always starts small. He began CCING me on fewer client emails, said it was just streamlining communication. I let that slide the first time. Told myself he was simply trying to reduce my workload during a difficult personal season. Second time, when I noticed I'd been quietly dropped from a major client renewal call I'd personally handled for 6 years, I realized it wasn't consideration at all. Then came the executive restructuring meeting. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. Costs you nothing, means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. I found out about it entirely by accident, a calendar invite forwarded to me by our controller, Janet Yee, who assumed I'd already seen it and simply wanted to confirm a follow-up item. The meeting had happened 2 days earlier. Marcus had gathered the senior leadership team, 6 people, and announced, according to the notes Janet forwarded along with an apologetic note of her own, that going forward, given recent personal changes, Diane would be stepping back from client-facing responsibilities to focus more fully on internal financial operations, a transition intended to project stability and professionalism to our client base during a period of change. I read that paragraph 4 times before I fully understood what I was looking at. My own brother had held a meeting about restructuring my role, my career, the position I'd built over 25 years, without inviting me, without discussing it with me first, and had framed my divorce, a private, painful, entirely personal matter, as a professionalism problem the company needed managed. I sat at my own desk for a long moment after reading it, staring at my computer screen, feeling something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the divorce itself and everything to do with realizing exactly how my own brother had chosen to discuss me when he assumed I'd never know. I called Marcus directly. He picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could hear, before he even said hello, a flicker of something in the pause that told me he already suspected I knew. "Diane, hey," he said, his voice carrying that particular brightness people use when they're hoping the conversation stays surface level. "I saw the notes from Tuesday's leadership meeting," I said, keeping my voice level, the way I've kept my voice level through 25 years of difficult client conversations. The one about my role changing. The one I wasn't invited to. A pause. "Diane, I was going to talk to you about it properly, I promise. I just wanted to have a plan in place first before bringing it to you, so it didn't feel half-formed. You restructured my job in a meeting I wasn't in, Marcus, and framed my divorce as a professionalism concern for our clients. There is no version of that conversation I need you to have had more fully formed before telling me about it. Diane, come on, that's not fair. I just think, with everything you're going through personally, it might be easier for you to have a lighter client load right now. Less pressure. I was trying to protect you." "You were trying to protect the optics," I said. "There's a difference, and I think you know it." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't think that's fair." "I'll let you get back to your day," I said, and I hung up, because I've learned in 25 years of business that the loudest reaction in a room rarely wins the room, and I needed time to think, not time to argue. I drove home that evening in silence, no radio, just the sound of my own tires on I-90, thinking about an 8-year-old girl sweeping floors in our father's machine shop, and a 47-year-old woman, freshly divorced, 25 years into building the exact career her brother now believed needed to be quietly managed away from clients because her personal life had become inconvenient for the company's image. I thought about Dad too, somewhere in that drive, wondering what he would have made of the whole thing, and landing with total certainty on the belief that he would have been livid, not at my divorce, never at that, but at the idea that anyone in that building, let alone his own son, had decided a woman's private pain was fair game for a leadership agenda item. I didn't say anything else to Marcus that night, or the next morning, or for 6 weeks after that. Some things you don't fix with a phone call. Some things you let sit until they're ready to be handled properly. Here's what Marcus did not know, sitting in that leadership meeting deciding my professional future without me. Here's what the rest of the senior team did not fully appreciate, watching their CEO reshape his own sister's career around a divorce that was, frankly, none of the company's business. Here's what nobody in that room understood until it was far too late to matter. I controlled the majority of Kowalski Precision Tooling shares. Had for 7 years, quietly, invisibly, through Rosalind's holding entity. Exactly the way I'd built it to be from the beginning. Every major governance decision, technically, required my approval as majority shareholder, approval I had, for 7 years, delegated almost entirely to Marcus through standard proxy arrangements Rosalind managed on my behalf, because I trusted him, because he was my brother, because I never once wanted to hold that ownership over his head. Those 6 weeks were not easy ones for me, and I want to be honest about that rather than pretend I processed it all with total serenity. I sat with real anger during parts of those 6 weeks, anger I'm not entirely proud of, at a brother who'd apparently decided my private grief made me a liability rather than simply a person going through something hard. Some nights I sat alone in my own kitchen, the one Craig and I used to share, and wondered whether Marcus had ever really seen me as anything other than the reliable numbers person quietly keeping the lights on behind him, rather than a full partner in the thing our father built. That thought hurt more than the actual meeting had, honestly, once I let myself sit with it fully. I called Rosalind during that stretch, not to take action yet, just to talk it through, and she listened the way she always does, patient, precise, and when I finished she said only, "Diane, you saved that company with your own money and never asked for a single ounce of credit. You don't owe Marcus your silence about your own life on top of that." What I did, after those 6 weeks of thinking, was formally revoke the standing proxy arrangement that had allowed Marcus to operate as though he held full governance authority, a legal step Rosalind executed cleanly through the holding entity, restoring direct majority shareholder decision-making to me for any matter requiring board-level approval going forward. I then requested a formal shareholder meeting, invoking rights I had never once exercised in 7 years of quiet ownership. The meeting happened 12 days later, our company's own boardroom, the same room where Dad used to review quarterly numbers with me back when I was still learning the business at his elbow, the same worn conference table he'd bought secondhand in 1988 and refused to ever replace because, in his words, a table that survived that many hard conversations has earned the right to stay ugly. Marcus walked in expecting a routine quarterly governance check-in, the kind Rosalind's office scheduled periodically as a formality. He had no idea what was actually about to happen. "Diane," he said, settling into his seat. Rosalind's office said this was a routine shareholder check-in. "What's going on?" He said it lightly, still fully unaware, reaching for his coffee the way he always does at the start of any meeting, a small habitual gesture that suddenly struck me as almost unbearably ordinary given what was about to happen in that room. "It is a shareholder check-in," I said. "I'm the majority shareholder, Marcus. I have been for 7 years." The room went silent in that specific way rooms go quiet when the math stops being theoretical. "What are you talking about?" Marcus said slowly. "In 2017, when the second facility expansion nearly took this company under, I liquidated a significant portion of my personal savings and anonymously purchased controlling shares through Rosalind's firm to prevent the bank from forcing liquidation. I have held majority ownership of Dad's company for 7 years. I never told you because I didn't want you carrying the weight of knowing your sister had to save what you'd nearly lost. I wanted you to rebuild it believing you'd earned that rebuild honestly, which you did, Marcus. I want you to hear that clearly. Everything you've built since 2017 you built. I just made sure there was still a company standing for you to build it in." The color left Marcus's face slowly, completely, the way water drains from a glass. "You've owned this company," he said, "this whole time." "I have," I said. And 2 weeks ago, you held a meeting about restructuring my role away from clients because of my divorce, in a room I wasn't invited into, and framed it as protecting the company's professionalism. So today, as majority shareholder, I'm exercising governance rights I have quietly declined to exercise for 7 years. Diane, I'm not removing you as CEO, I said, and I watched something shift in his face, relief and shame arriving at almost the same moment. You've earned that role through real work these last 7 years, and I have never once wanted to take that from you. But I am formally reinstating myself to full client-facing responsibilities, effective immediately, and I am requiring, going forward, that any decision materially affecting my role or responsibilities be brought to me directly, not decided in a meeting about me that I'm not present for. One of the other executives, our longtime operations director Bill Fenwick, who'd worked for our father since 1981, cleared his throat. Diane, for what it's worth, several of us in that meeting felt uncomfortable with how the whole thing was framed. Nobody felt it was our place to say so. I appreciate you saying it now, I told him. Marcus sat there, silent, and I watched something move across his face that I recognized. The specific look of a man finally understanding the size of what he'd underestimated, not just about my ownership, but about me. It was the same look he used to get as a kid right after Dad caught him in a lie he thought was airtight, a slow unraveling of certainty he clearly hadn't expected to need that day. I'm not interested in embarrassing you further than this moment requires, I said. But I do want you to understand something clearly today in this room. This company exists because our father built it, and because I quietly made sure it survived a mistake that could have ended it. My divorce is not a professionalism problem. It's a private, painful thing I've handled with more grace than most people manage, and it was never yours to manage on my behalf, especially not in a meeting where I couldn't defend myself. I let that settle in the room for a moment before continuing, watching it land on each face around that table, not just Marcus's. The room stayed silent. Marcus's mouth opened, closed. Here's what happens next, I said. I resume full client relationships starting this week. Janet will help me reconnect with the renewal accounts I was quietly dropped from. And we're going to have a real conversation, you and I, outside this room, about why you thought this was yours to decide alone. Marcus called me that night. I let it ring twice before I picked up, mostly to see if my hand would shake. It didn't. Diane, he said, and his voice was rough, genuinely rattled. I don't even know where to start. 7 years. You've owned this company for 7 years and never said one word. He paused, and I could hear him pacing, the way he always used to when we were kids and he'd broken something and was working up to admitting it. I keep thinking about all the times I made a decision in that boardroom like I was the only one with real skin in the game. Every single time, and you were sitting right there letting me believe that. I didn't need you to know, I said. I needed the company to survive, and I needed you to rebuild it clean without that weight on you. Those were never contradictory goals for me. And I repaid that by trying to sideline you the second my sister got divorced, he said, and I heard real self-disgust in his voice. God, Diane. I am so sorry. I think somewhere in my head I convinced myself I was protecting you, protecting the company, but really I think I was just uncomfortable, and I made that your problem instead of mine. That's honest, I said. I appreciate you saying it plainly. I'd like to understand how you actually see this business, he said. Not the CEO version. The version of someone who's quietly kept it alive for 7 years and never once asked for credit. There was something almost boyish in how he said it, the same tone he used to use asking Dad to explain a machine he didn't understand yet, genuinely curious rather than defensive. I'd like that too, I said, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight since that calendar invite landed in my inbox. I'll give you the rest quickly, because you've earned the ending same as I did. I resumed full client relationships within the week, and every single one of those renewal accounts welcomed me back warmly, several telling me directly they'd noticed my absence and hadn't understood why. One longtime client, a purchasing director I'd worked with for over a decade, actually told me she'd been on the verge of raising concerns internally about a shift in tone on our calls before I'd even come back, which told me plainly that whatever Marcus thought he was protecting by sidelining me, it hadn't been the client relationships themselves. The company's next quarterly numbers were the strongest in 3 years, And Marcus, to his genuine credit, mentioned my role publicly in the company newsletter for the first time in longer than I could remember, not as an afterthought, but as an equal partner in Dad's legacy. Marcus and I have dinner most Sunday evenings now the way we used to before Dad passed, at the same diner on Lorraine Avenue our father used to take us to after church, and he asks real questions about the business these days, not the polished version, the real one. Rosalind tells me it's the healthiest working relationship she's seen between siblings in her entire career managing family holding structures, which does not surprise me, because Marcus, underneath the mistake he made, has always genuinely loved this company and, it turns out, genuinely loves his sister too, once given the chance to actually see her clearly. Janet came by my office the Friday after that boardroom meeting, closed the door the way she rarely does, and told me she'd always suspected something had shifted in 2017 but never once imagined it was this. "You could have told me," she said, not upset, just curious. I wouldn't have said a word. I told her I knew that completely, and that the not telling had never once been about trust, it had simply been about giving Marcus room to rebuild something honestly, the same room our father would have wanted him to have. Janet nodded slowly and said that sounded exactly like something Stanley Kowalski's daughter would do, which is possibly the nicest thing anyone said to me in years. I still show up every single day as CFO Diane, the woman who does the numbers, but I don't hide behind that title anymore either. Bill Fenwick started calling me boss lady as a joke about 2 months ago, and Marcus laughed the first time he heard it and never once corrected him. I still drive a practical sedan and still eat lunch at my desk most days, and I still don't wear what I built, and I never will. But this company, every honest hour it ever ran on, every family that still has steady work because I quietly refused to let it collapse in 2017, was never something anybody needed to call a professionalism concern to make it small enough to feel comfortable managing without me. It was always exactly what it looked like. 25 years of a woman's whole working life, still worth protecting, right up until the day I stopped being able to. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family stories. I'll see you on the next one.